5-time best-selling New York Times author, Jim Marrs. He's going to come up here in just a second. I've known Jim for a few years, and it's a privilege to know him. He's an expert on just enormous amount of topics, very deep down the rabbit hole. And the thing maybe you may not know about Jim, he does not always drink beer. But when he does, he prefers Dos Equis. So here's Jim Marrs.
Well, let's not forget what Benjamin Franklin wrote about beer. He said, beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. Thank y'all. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am deeply honored to see all of you people who have actually stepped away from your TV, stepped away from your comfortable homes to come out to possibly find out what's really going on in the world, okay? We just need more of us, okay? So all of you all, take it upon yourself. If you learned something tonight and you think that you have a little more insight as to what's going on, then please go out and chat it up with your friends and your neighbors and our relatives, and you know, let's see if we can spread the word. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to read to you the words of John Farmer. Who's John Farmer? John Farmer was a former Attorney General of New Jersey, and he just happens to have been selected as the senior counsel for the official 9/11 Commission, okay? Now let me point out about the 9/11 Commission. The day after Pearl Harbor, Congress convened a commission to try to find out what had happened to this disastrous attack in Hawaii. Less than a week after the Kennedy assassination, then President Lyndon Johnson formed the Warren Commission to investigate, to find out what had really happened to John F. Kennedy. Almost 2 years after 9/11, President George W. Bush finally was pressured into forming a committee to investigate what really happened on 9/11. And originally he funded it for $3 million. Okay, now to us that sounds like a lot of money, but I assure you, in the context of Washington, D.C., that's just pocket change. In fact, the 9/11 Commission staff themselves said, we can't conduct an investigation for $3 million. So eventually he upped it by another 10, making the total expenditure for the 9/11 Commission studying the worst terrorist attack in American history, $13 million. Now to put that in a context, in 2004, the Republican National Committee announced that they had spent $60 million on inauguration festivities for George W. Bush. They spent 4 times more on Bush's re-inauguration party than they did to investigate 9/11. And what did we get for it? Well, again, I want to refer to the words of John Farmer, the senior counsel, the head lawyer of the 9/11 Commission, who in 2009 published a book called The Ground Truth. And in there, to show you it was really important, on page 2, he writes, in the course of our investigation into the national response to the attacks, the 9/11 Commission staff discovered that the official version of what had occurred that morning, that is, what government and military officials had told the Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what and when, was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. Untrue. Okay, so I ask you folks, what is the problem if the head of the 9/11 Commission legal staff says that the story they were given and that they gave to us is untrue? Don't you think it's time we find out what the truth was? Because 9/11, whether you want to think about it or not, is the sine qua non, the basis for everything that's going on in America right now, which has most Americans, thinking Americans, upset. Constant wars in the Middle East, groping by the TSA, aggressive police state tactics, loss of liberty, the Military Commissions Act, the Patriot Act, Homeland Security. By the way, Homeland Security, in case you don't really realize it, is the new American Gestapo. When Hitler took charge in Germany, he created the secret state police, the Gestapo, Geheimdienstpolizei, and what that did was unify the command of all of the police agencies in Germany under one roof, the Gestapo. And under the Homeland Security Act, we've got the consolidation of all the police forces in this country. Arlington Police, Dallas Police, Fort Worth Police, Wise County Sheriff's Office, FEMA, you name it. It's all under the same umbrella now. And I'm not sure that a police state is exactly what we were taught in school when we were kids. So it is absolutely important that we go back to find out what truly happened on 9/11, because if we've been lied to, and if it was not the truth, then how can we move forward as a people and a nation living on a pack of lies? Now, having said that, I want to introduce the speaker for tonight, an extraordinary gentleman who was the founder for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now, I was one of the founding members of the scholars for 9/11 Truth. There were several thousands. Today, there's more than 2,500 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. These are people who've studied architecture, studied structural engineering. They know what buildings can do and cannot do. And they have, in addition to the 2,500 architects and engineers, they have more than 20,000 people who have signed on to support their organization. And the founder is your speaker for tonight, and I am honored and pleased to introduce to you our speaker for tonight, Richard Gage.
Hi everybody. It's wonderful to be back in Dallas again. This is just awesome. I wanted you to know that I am so honored tonight to be sharing the platform with Jim Marrs, who is iconic for all of us in the truth-telling business, the passion and mission of telling the truth to the American people, which is rare in the mainstream media, rare in our government, rare almost anywhere. So when you have the opportunity to come to hear what's going on, I'm encouraging you always bring 6 friends. We should have this hall full of people. In fact, let's talk about people here tonight. I want to ask you how, everybody falls into one of these categories. How many of us agree with the official story about how the towers came down? How many of us are unsure? And then how many of us came into the room already having looked at some of the evidence and come to the conclusion that the towers were brought down by controlled demolition, which is going to be our specific area of focus today. So, first of all, the official story: jet planes hit the towers, large explosion of jet fuel, fires ensued, weakened the structural steel, and a gravitational collapse all the way down to the ground. No reason to believe otherwise. This is what our government and media have told us. And like me 8 years ago, how many of you pretty much believe the official story coming in? No. How many? 1, 2, 3? Anybody else? Just 3? That's it? How many of you are unsure? Some of you might still look. You've looked at a few things. You're here to check this out. Go like this. I need to count you actually way up high so I can see you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. How many of you have already come in having looked at the evidence for controlled demolition? Agree with the evidence? Oh my God. Why didn't you guys bring all your friends? Try it. You don't have any more friends. I know the feeling. This is not an easy subject to deal with, is it? Really, really tough, in fact. I have a friend. His name is Eric Lawyer. He's the founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. They have 200 firefighters calling for a new investigation. A few years back, he and I teamed up. He gave the perspective from the firefighters, and it's incredible. You're going to see him on film with me tonight. And we're going to start that film. But first of all, I just wanted you to know what happened to me. 9 years ago, I was just stunned when I heard this information on the radio. I literally had to pull over my car into the parking lot of the high school. I had been at a meeting, it was under construction. My knees were shaking, my world was starting to tremble, because here's this old man talking about this evidence that you're going to be hearing more concisely about tonight. And surely he must be lying. I mean, it couldn't be true what he was saying. And yet, why was he saying it? He didn't seem like he was lying. And if he wasn't lying, then everything I'd heard from the media since 2001 and on 2001 was a lie. And I couldn't comprehend this. I couldn't, my whole world was just beginning to shift, literally upside down. I mean, I was rooting for Colin Powell at the United Nations making his indisputable case for weapons of mass destruction. Reagan Republican, that's me. So, I was very conservative. I was on the neocon side. I was neocon job. And I wasn't any better off as a liberal either. I've come to learn a few things about the left and the right. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about this information. We're going to talk about what it means. Because what it implies is a lot more important even than understanding exactly what happened, right? A lot of things happened since 9/11. So with that in mind, let's start the film and stick around. Ask me the tough questions. If I can't answer them, we'll get Jim Marrs up here. So with that in mind, can we ask you to step up to the microphone here and ask some questions? We are recording, so the CIA will be they're everywhere. So stand in line if you wouldn't mind behind this gentleman if you've got a question, and just belt it out.
As I recall, it seems to me that they sort of rushed the original report. I get several questions actually. It seems like they rushed the original report and wasn't it sort of rushed to get it out before an election that we were having. And then it seems to me that they were supposed to come back and do a further, more in-depth investigation into possible reasons why stuff happened. And it seems to me that just sort of got whitewashed and never happened. That's one question.
I don't doubt that, but I don't know about it.
I met Mr. Rodriguez when he was here in Dallas, who was the...
Willie Rodriguez.
Yes. We met him at the Lakewood Theater over here, and he had informed us about an explosion that did take place in the basement of the first tower, I think 20 or 30 or 40 seconds before the first plane.
I think it's about 7 seconds, or maybe 17 seconds.
Something like that, yeah. I've never seen much of a discussion about that either. There's a lot of things like that and none of his testimony ever made it into the 9/11.
Well, right, he testified before the 9/11 Commission, and it did not make it into the record. This is extraordinary. The basement explosion he describes underneath him. He's in level B1, and pushed them up, and the ceiling actually came down. It was a huge explosion in the basement. Then he heard later the plane hit the tower up above him. It's pretty extraordinary. I personally think that they weren't taking out the structure down in the basement. I have a feeling that was the sprinkler main that they were sabotaging. That's just a guess. Because they wanted this fire to spread, not to be put out. That's the deception.
Now, another question is that I've heard, and I've heard dispute on this. There's lots of trolls online, of course, that have tried to
explain for those who don't know what a troll is.
Trolls are people who basically get online and try to ridicule 9/11 truth people. They post all kinds of ridiculous garbage. But one of the things that I heard that I believe is true is that they had found the titanium core of one of the jet engines that they found on the sidewalks of New York. And that it was the titanium, the core that runs out in the middle of the jet engine, has the blades attached to it and everything. And from what I understand, it is from a jet engine, the make or model of which has never been installed on the commercial version of the airframes of these planes, and is only used on the military transport version of these aircraft. I was wondering if anyone had looked into that.
There's a lot of people who have looked into that, and a lot of people who have looked into what planes actually hit these towers. And most of them conclude that it wasn't the planes that took off from the original airports, which raises all kinds of very interesting questions beyond our scope. Any of you who want to answer some of these questions, because there's a lot of people, in addition to Jim Marrs here. Where's Jim? Where are you hiding? Over there, who can answer these kinds of questions, who've been researching this information a lot longer than myself. I came on the scene, what, 4 years late. How many of you are here before 2006 working with these issues? And look at the hands. This is incredible. They didn't have any architects and engineers organized to help them, did you guys? We came late. So, forgot where I was heading with that. But go ahead and ask your question. You're going to do that every time there's somebody tall and then short?
Since we're all in agreement that explosives were used in this particular event, I believe that's the survey that you just took.
I think there's a couple who were unsure.
Okay. But virtually all of us,
unsure.
there are some demonic, satanic, evil forces that are behind all of this. Your life and people like you who are organizing have to be in danger. Why have you not been silenced? That's my first question.
Can we take them one at a time? Because that one just kind of did me in here. I can tell you this, I have not been threatened, and I have not been assassinated. And I count my blessings every day, because I realized when I took this on that I was taking on something a lot, we're talking about the biggest mafia the world has ever done, right? To put something like this together at this scale, fool the whole world, and sort of get away with it. This is a huge operation involving industry and finance beyond our imagination, probably. At least key people in key places. But I know this. I said to myself, I would rather die speaking the truth than to live in a police state, because that's where we're headed.
No, we're there. No, we're not headed. We are there.
All they have to do is flip the switch. All the legal mechanisms are in place, and it could get really bad.
How many architects and engineers are there in this country?
Hundreds of thousands.
Why are not more than 2,300 behind your effort?
Well, first of all, most of them don't even know that about the third worst structural failure in modern history, Building 7. It's absolutely incredible. We went to speak in Las Vegas to an assembly of 400 structural engineers. We were able to speak to 100 of those 400, because they don't all come by our booth. We asked them, we showed Building 7 constantly coming down. We said, did you know a third tower came down in 9/11? What? And it always stops, just unless most of them. And I go, yeah, what's bringing this down? Fire or controlled demolition? Wow. Almost all of them say controlled demolition. Then we say, did you know this happened on 9/11? It's kind of like the Danny Jawinkle moment. This expert that you've heard, I don't know if you've heard of this. So he's brought down, he's the best in Europe, and he's brought down all of these controlled demolitions. And he says, yeah, a team of experts does professional work without a doubt. Then they tell him it came down in 9/11, and he's sitting there stammering, trying to figure out, how did this happen? Well, we've got the structural engineers there, and we're able to get 25% of them, which is 25, signed up last week on our petition, which is incredible, because, first look at it, they're ready to sign it. Yeah, that's not fire. You mean they said fire brought that building down? And we showed them the fires, there are few small scattered fires in that building. most of them are pretty smart. Some of them are too smart for their own good. It's pretty amazing how they say, oh yeah, just a few of them. But it's amazing to see this. How else can it fall? It's 90% air. We've heard that from smart people. We've heard, I'm coming back to your question. I'm on a rant here about structural engineers. They say, oh yeah, how else can it fall? Free fall acceleration, yeah. Once it gets started, it goes all the way down. Anyway, we got 25 more. Everybody we can get into these audiences, and we've tried in technical venues as well. They end up agreeing with us, 99% of us, and signing our petition. The question is, how do we get in front of them? That's why we created this incredible booklet, 50 pages of our evidence. It's designed for academics, professionals, media, to be put on elected representatives. All of you should get a dozen of these to take to your elected representatives and architecture and engineering firms. Some people will, it's not overly technical at all. So it's full of pictures, it's graphic. Really nice job that our team did putting this together. We've got a bunch of them in the back, and there's DVDs there as well. 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, our landmark DVD. There's a plastic case version for $20. There's a cardboard case for $10. There's other DVDs, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, which you can get for $10. It's the 10-minute, 30-minute, and 60-minute version of 8 9/11 Truth's famous 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. Finally, Ed Asner, a 10-minute DVD, 15-minute documentary on World Trade Center 7. It's extraordinary. How many of you have seen that one? Ed Asner, 15 minutes. It's awesome. Just 15 minutes of Building 7. It'll convince anybody.
Well, I admire your effort, but let me just say this. Until you get 50,000 architects and engineers, you're not going to get very far. I can promise you that. But there are hundreds of thousands of them, and they're professionals, and this is no offense to people, Americans, patriots, firefighters, policemen, or anybody else, but it's going to take a professional, like an architect or an engineer, but in the masses, and until you get that, I think it's going to be tough.
Agreed. Yeah, we've got a long road ahead of us, and we've had a long road behind us. How long does it have to be? I don't know how long it has to be, but I do want you to meet one very interesting person, and that's Jerry Lobdell. Jerry, can you come up? I want to share, Jerry's one of the experts in our film, 9/11 Explosive Evidence. Might have to use the stair. 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. Has 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolitions expert. Jerry Lobdell's a chemical engineer, is that right? And I want him to give some perspective for you before we go on with the questions. Because he's just so brilliant with this stuff, and he's done some original research on this, and we're just delighted to have Jerry from Dallas, Texas.
Do you hear me? No. Well, I watched the come down in real time the day it happened on TV, and I knew right away that it was not what they said it was. I have a degree in chemical engineering and a graduate degree in physics, and I think they've done a tremendous job here in talking about the physics of free fall. You can't have something come down in free fall if there's anything underneath it that's keeping it from going down fast. And you just have to see that that World Trade Center 7 and the others, they came down essentially at free fall. You watch the top of the thing come down, and you watch it all happen in real time. There's no way that can happen in any way but controlled demolition. So I've been at this for a long time. I helped Dr. Steve Jones with some of the chemical work that was done, and we published some papers about it. The work that I did had to do with the microspheres and how they happened to happen, and what kind of chemistry was going on, the physical chemistry of it. The paper that I wrote is on the it was there's a 9/11 journal of 9/11. What's it called? Yeah, Journal of 9/11 Studies online, and you can get a whole bunch of technical papers. The one that I did is in that. But it's just incredible what they have tried to do to make us believe this total bullshit, you know. And
chemical engineering language.
yeah. And you know, it's just amazing how people, they won't. You know, it's like John Gross at NIST said. You know, what are you going to do? You're going to believe me, or your lying eyes? You know, the fact of the matter is, the videos are evidence beyond compare, and that's real evidence. And they just denied it, and people have bought it. It just blows my mind. So anyway, I'm glad to see as many people here this many years after the fact. And Richard Gage, I have never seen anybody with the stamina as he's got for pursuing this. Thanks
So much. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go back to your question.
To answer the gentleman's question who was just here about why the architects aren't signing up, I am one of those coward architects. And we like our jobs. We have a lot invested in our careers, and I would guess that you've sacrificed your career for this. And that's not an easy thing to do, Richard, and I'm almost in tears thinking of what you put on the line here for this thing. It's very easy to just not get invited to submit a proposal because they heard you on the radio, or there's something wrong with Richard. He believes in this truth stuff. And what would happen if our big clients found out? So there's a lot of architects. Why do we need to mess with this guy? And when I first heard about this from another architect, incidentally, a couple of years ago, part of my calculus was to preserve my career, to keep my mouth shut. And so I'm not listed on your website. And I wanted to let you guys know in the room that I don't believe there's a conspiracy to put architects out of business. I believe it's just the way the world works. And we can't keep doing this. And thanks a lot, Richard, for doing what you do.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask, how many architects are in the room? Signed up on our petition, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4. And over here? 4. How many engineers? Oh, there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many normal people? Okay, good. We're balanced.
Those people were not normal, by the way. Thank you again. I follow your lead since I found out around 2007. I also shook hands with William Rodriguez and heard him talk, and that was it. I had to get off the bench a little bit. But the way you do it without speculation is very powerful in the climate we have, and I appreciate that. And I keep on hammering that away with the people that I associate with. My question is this. Have you considered this group of professionals that I happened to run into. I never thought of it, but a friend of mine, turns out he's disappeared from my life, is a forensic engineer.
Your friend is the forensic engineer?
Yeah, in Dallas they have this group, and one guy specializes in fire, and they study building collapses. That's what they do. And when I told him about this, I said, you need to look at Blueprint for Truth. I never saw him again. But I used to play music with him, and it just seems like this whole bunch of people that maybe you ought to think about.
Thank you. Forensic engineers are at a conference in Miami, and we applied to go there as well. And what happened was they denied us. The American Society of Civil Engineers, who was highly controlled, who was chosen to do an initial study on the test, who, despite their being controlled, actually had several problems with having no access to the steel, no access to information, no budget. Nevertheless, they provided what amounted to the official theory of how the towers came down by geoplate impacts and weakening structural steel, etc. They denied us. They said we were off topic. So we keep trying. Yes.
I just want to say that I've been following you for years, Mr. Marrs. So, you know, when I see a celebrity or a rock star, I usually don't really care, but like my heart's kind of pounding. I'm a little bit nervous right now, so you'll have to forgive me, everyone. But, you know, when 9/11 happened, I was waking up from a morning of partying. I just got out of high school, and my mom called me, and she said, you need to turn on the TV. Oh my God, like so many other people. And I turned it on, and instantly, I felt like something was wrong. Like, you know, first of all, they were saying, oh my God, another bomb. If another bomb goes off, these buildings might not last much longer. You know, and years later, we rewatch these things, and it's hard to imagine how we could have forgotten them so easily. But little things like that jump out at you, you know, when the initial thing happened. But one of the persistent questions and mysteries that I've had through the years is the intense heat in the rubble after the collapse. And I mean, accounting for all the mass that fell and all of the distribution of masses, it was collapsing downwards and exploding outwards, as we all, you know, have come to understand. Is there any physical science way of describing how that much heat could persist and be maintained for such an extended period of time?
Well, thermite is an incendiary that produces 4,000 degree temperatures as its byproduct.
I meant aside from thermite, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the question is about persistence, though, which hasn't been covered in the materials. So what we do know is that the dust is full of unignited thermite and these small red-gray chips, of which there's extrapolated to be probably 10 tons throughout all the World Trade Center dust, based on how much they found in each of the small samples that they did get.
Never mind the dust in the lungs, though. Okay.
Well, separate issue.
Yeah, of course.
So, unignited thermite in all the dust, which is everywhere, including down in the pile, could keep on reigniting with these fires. I don't know how long it takes for molten iron to cool. That could be figured out.
Right.
But I think it is another one of the mysteries that why, for months, 2 months, maybe 3, until December, these fires could not be put out.
I mean, boots melting on the ground.
Well, we do know that they were putting like a lake of water down
Sure.
there, they described it. We do know that thermite burns underneath water just as well. It has its own source of oxygen. So there's certainly more research that needs to be.
So, you know, that being said, it's hard to maintain the idea that there was no thermite, there was no kind of pyroclastic involvement in the whole situation, simply because of that heat that had been maintained for so long. At least that's my take on it.
Hey, Richard, I'm inclined to agree. Jim, come on up. Jim Marrs, let's give Jim a big hand again. We're going to hear some more from Jim. And then I want you to have the opportunity to know who the activists are here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, particularly Pat and Stu, and what they're doing and how they can get you involved. So get ready, Pat and Stu, wherever you are. And Jane Clark, I want you to, where's Jane? Jane left. I was going to get to meet Jane. Jim Marrs.
Thank you. All right, I've got two questions, okay? Number one, have any of y'all ever tried to destroy a toilet? Think about it. How do you destroy a toilet? It's damn difficult. You got a 210-story building, and they collapse. You should have had at least 10 stories of rubble, including filing cabinets and toilets, but they're not there.
10,000 filing cabinets.
Exactly. Where are they? Okay, what happened? Now, I can't tell you precisely. We could spend here all night and I can tell you some theories and some good ideas. But what I can tell you is that we have not been told the truth. And one of the reasons for this is if you're the government, and you use exotic technology not generally known to the public, then you can pull off something and you can put in any cover story you want to, and it's going to be damn difficult for anyone to contradict you, right? What am I talking about? Okay, well, obviously I'm talking about the methods used to demolish the World Trade Center. You've got a really good education tonight on some of that aspect. But let's talk about the aircraft real quick. In the late 1980s, I interviewed a pilot for a major airline who was flying big wide-body Boeing jets. And at the end of the interview, we were just talking, and he said, you know, my job's just redundant. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, today the computers run the aircraft. He said, I'm just there in case the computer fails. You know, I said, oh. He said, yeah, they've even got it now to where they can remotely capture the onboard computer, and they can fly it remotely, all right? In fact, in early 2001, the head of British Airways actually made an announcement and said, you know, the era of skyjacking's over with. He said, because now we can remotely capture the onboard computers of major airliners, and we can land them safely regardless of what the hijackers or the flight crew want, okay? And so on 9/11, when I heard that 4 separate hijack crews had hijacked 4 separate airliners, took off from 4 separate airports at 4 separate times, and yet the transponders of all 4 aircraft went off at approximately the same time, I said, that's not possible, unless they are captured electronically. Now today, the pilotless aircraft everybody knows about this. You go to the movies, you can see ads for the Air Force that say, hey, come to Fort Huachuca, you can fly these drones over Afghanistan and bomb innocent villages, you know. Great deal, man. Come join the Air Force. So we all know about Global Hawk technology. Now, and that was in effect at that time, but nobody much knew about it. Except, you know, Chris Carter did. Everybody remember Chris Carter? The guy who was the creator of the X-Files. Okay, everybody loved the X-Files. Well, if you'll remember in the X-Files, Mulder and Scully, the FBI guys, they didn't really come up with all of these theories on their own. They were tipped off to what was really going on by the lone gunmen, which I always love that, the lone gunmen, okay? Well, these are the 3 computer nerds, all right? And they would figure out, they had a conspiracy newsletter that went out, and they would inform Mulder and Scully as to what was going on, and then they go out and do the legwork to prove it up. On March the 3rd, 2001, 6 months before 9/11, Chris Carter offered up a pilot show that was going to be a follow-on and a sequel to the X-Files called The Lone Gunman. And in that particular show, which I think you can still find on the internet, one of the lone gunmen says, oh, my dad got killed in a car crash, and then it turns out, oops, he wasn't really dead. He'd been attacked by a hitman, and he overcame him and put him in the car and crashed it, made it look like he died, so they wouldn't come after him. And they were saying, well, who would come after you? He said, well, the government. He said, but wait a minute, you work for the government. You know, he said, yeah, I know, but it's what I know. Well, what do you know? And as this plot unfolds, it turns out that elements within the United States government were planning to, by computer capture a major airliner and crash it into the World Trade Center under the guise of a military exercise and blame it on Middle Eastern terrorists. Holy cow! This was 6 months before 9/11. Go check it out. So there's a lot going on. Now my last question is this. You guys are in big trouble because now you know something and you can't unknow it. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to give a little money to architects and engineers and then go home and say, well, I've done my part. Or are you going to tough up and be an American citizen and try to do something to get this country back on an even keel for everybody, liberty and justice for all?
Awesome. And nobody's doing more about it than right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Stu and Pat Nelson and O'Connell. Pat, you guys come on up. They're going to introduce you to some of the other activists as well and invite you to think about what you can do. And we'll come back to your questions in just a moment. So, this is very exciting for me to be here. I've been working with Stu and Pat and Jane Clark on our legal team also for a long time, and I am just tickled pink to meet you guys.
Stu Nelson.
Thank you. Again, thank you everybody for being here tonight. I know that there's other things that everybody has a busy life, so we're doing everything we can to form meetup groups. I know I mentioned that earlier, meeting groups and all that kind of stuff. And there's lots of stuff to discuss about what's going on our planet right now. And bottom line is, we've got some crazy people running the planet. Well, let me just go with this. There's a thing called being an American. There's a thing called being un-American. There's no un-Irish or un-Japanese or un-Australian or whatever, right? Because it has a connotation. When you say you're an American, that means you're free. That means you think. That means you make a difference. That means you speak out, right? That's what our founding fathers fought for. Let me hand it over to Pat. But let's just remember what our founding fathers did. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best that we've come up with in history. Want to remind you that we'll call and I'll contact you if it's okay. We want to start meeting groups everywhere. If we can mobilize, we can use these little wristbands for conversation. We can grab T-shirts. You know, about did you know a third tower fell?
Oh, stand up and show your T-shirt.
Yeah, you know, it's conversation pieces. There's just all kinds of ways. We can mention Building 7 to somebody 7 days a week. Just mention Building 7. Maybe put it on your phone, building collapse. Hey man, you see this controlled demolition? Wow, yeah, well, where's that? Oh, that was Building 7 on 9/11. You know, there's all kinds of little creative ways we can let people know this is the most important event in American history. So, join with us and help us out.
And also we want to recognize the volunteers that helped us tonight. John, on the camera back there. Sherry, she leads the Fort Worth group, the meeting. And they are going to meetup, so please join their meetup. Tell us what it, I don't have the thing that says what it is. But it's on your welcome packet on the label. Join their meetup and then you'll get notices of any events or meetings that are coming up. Bob, thank you for handling the A&E table. We would like to ask Richard, Jim, Maritha, and Ann, who is with the lodge, to please come up. Is Ann back there?
Yeah, she's back there.
Come on, Ann.
We have a gift for you.
We have something for you guys. Aretha, Jim, come up. Come on. We're presenting you guys with a special honorary degree tonight, a PhD in agnotology. Agnotology is the scientific study of culturally induced ignorance.
As long as it's not the third degree.
So you guys are all now PhDs from the University of Idiocracy, the College of Complexes, and we just want to acknowledge that, and Anne now has been indoctrinated, which you didn't expect. And thank you so much for all of your help in making this possible. She runs this lodge, and we want to appreciate that. And thank you all for coming. And back to the questions, but we've got your little degrees, your diplomas.
Come join us for dinner and beer.
Yes, afterwards, after we finish here, we're going down to BJ's Brew House. It's right on I-20 at Matlock in the Highland something or other. It's off of Highlander. It's in that area down there. But we're going up down there for snacks and drinks or whatever. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and so that's our new word for the night, agnotology. The scientific study of culturally induced ignorance. So thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you, Pat and Stu. Thank you, Jim. And everybody should get Jim's new book. Jim, what's the title of that book? The Terror Conspiracy Revisited. Yes, sir.
May I make an announcement to the group?
Please.
I am what is known as a TI, a targeted individual.
Okay, you have 10 more seconds. Go ahead.
And there is something going on behind our backs, and it's systematically taking people out with microwave technologies off of the cell towers. Those cell towers are loaded with technologies in our cell phones, and the cell phones transmit signals and bounce and relay signals from phone to phone. They load your frequency. Your body is like a fingerprint of a frequency.
Thank you. This is important information. Do you want to give a website?
FCHS.
FCHS.
FCHS.org.com.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to hand it to the gentleman.
Thank you.
And let's go on with our other questions.
I work at a small architecture firm, and for the past 2.5 years, I've been diligently speaking about 9/11, doing everything I can to help these guys really get. Thank you. But you know, one of them definitely on board. The other one still has some questions as far as you know, compression waves and the effect that such a large movement of mass would have on air pressure and whatnot, which might account for squibs and stuff like that. But ultimately, you know, the building tipping over, free fall, come on, it's just, he's honestly there. He's the architect. My final question to you, thank you for being patient, thank you all for putting up with me. But is there any ongoing litigation that you can speak of? I know that you just had something go through, if I'm not mistaken, in the not so distant past. But is there anything currently in motion?
There are several FOIA. Thank you. There are several FOIA requests that we're actually going to sue NIST to force them to release. Pat, can you? Pat, can you come up and tell us about some of the legal issues that are coming up? And before you do that, I'll just finish by saying the Freedom of Information Act requires NIST to release information when it's requested. And we have indeed made lots of requests. We've gotten lots of information back. A lot of our evidence has come from those FOIA requests. But we've now asked them for all of the videos, interviews, and other documents they have that they did in order to proceed with their investigation, and that's what they're holding back. And we have now submitted a lawsuit to force them to comply, which actually should work. because every time we have sued them, they have complied. But there are other legal actions going on.
Well, and I can't get into any specifics, but we've been talking with, in fact, she was here tonight, one of the attorneys that's working on these cases, and basically what they're doing is not getting into anything controversial. They're basically bringing charges, trying to bring charges against the agencies who failed to do their jobs, phenomenally failed across the board. This is not a coincidence. So they're bringing charges against those agencies who failed to protect our country that day. And so that's actually kind of a death by 1,000 cuts kind of approach. It's not the big enchilada, but we're hoping that at least that will wake up people when they see that, you know, there are all these agencies that are being at least charged, at least being taken to trial, and then evidence will come out. So that's a start. It's not the big thing, but you know, we're still working on it.
Thank you for the question. Yes.
I'm not sure whether you could elaborate on this or heard of this, but somewhere along the way I've come across either an article or one of the videos where there was a floor that was completely shut down and it was occupied by some foreign students, and there were some pictures that resulted from the students, I guess. And in those pictures, there were a bunch of boxes, and the boxes were labeled. And the label was traced back to be a company that manufactures electronic fuses, I believe, that would be associated with demolition. Are you aware of any of that? And
yes, I just became aware of this a week ago. You're citing the name, who brought this forth?
Rebecca Roth.
Rebecca Roth brought this information. And not that it wasn't around for years, but she picked it up, whereas no one else had. It's fascinating, and these are Israeli art students which are investigated by the FBI and I guess shipped back to Israel along with the dancing Israelis who were filming the towers being struck by planes and laughing about it. So.
Well, I mean, do we know whether that's a true...
You'll find all that.
Yeah. Oh, that's... That was a plug for you, Jim.
It's all in here about the Israeli involvement, about the art students, and the fact that 200 were thrown out of the country in the summer of 2002, and that they indeed were tracked around the country to 7 flight schools, restaurants, and hotels as the named 19 hijackers. And so there's obviously a very tight connection there, but what you're referring to now is the information Rebecca Roth has now brought out, that according to DEA documents, some of these people were Mossad agents, okay, with specialities in demolition, and that they had access to the both north and south towers under the guise of art students whose collective art project was codenamed Gelatin. Isn't that interesting? And they were living on the 91st floor of the North Tower, and yes, there are pictures of them with these boxes that traces to a company that, among other things, makes holders for demolition wiring.
Now, Jim, they had permission to live in the 2000?
Yes. Yes, in fact, there was a story a few months before the 9/11 attacks in the New York Times, which I missed, and apparently nobody connected until recently that about this art project in the Trade Center job.
How many of them were living?
That I'm not sure. It certainly wasn't the full 200.
40.
I'm sorry?
40.
40. There were 40.
I thought it was like 7 or 8, but I'm...
How long was this going on?
Oh, this was going on for some time because they were connected to an arts organization in Manhattan. Okay, and when you read my book, you'll read about the art students and the fact that they were traveling around the country and that they threw about 200 out in the summer of 2002. And they were also part of the ones you were talking about, the laughing video, yeah, the last dancing Israelis and people. They got arrested because they were filming and jumping up and down. And one of them told the arresting officers that they were there to record the event. And of course, you'll also read about Odigo, which was an Israeli messaging service, which that morning had sent some messages around between
their customers saying stay out of Manhattan. So it's obvious there was some degree of foreknowledge.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, there's so much you can talk about.
He said it. Now we've got 5 minutes. That's one question and answer per minute. We can do 5 more.
Just one real quick comment. You had alluded to in your video there, you were talking about, they'd have to control security and so on. But I was surprised that you didn't go ahead and add, and I'm asking this question to make sure I'm correct, that it was Bush's nephew or something that ran the security company that was the...
We know that Marvin Bush was on one of the board of directors of Securicom, Stratasec, who had the security contract for the World Trade Center towers up until the day of 9/11. Yeah, we certainly want an investigation of the security company as well as ACEL.
Met you last time you were in Dallas, so it's good to see you. Glad you could make it back. Quick comment here for the gentleman that was wondering about threats against you. I was going to ask that same question, so I was going to make a comment, but I've known some whistleblowers, people who have had threats against them, but the way the nasty powers to be for that gentleman is they either do one of two things, or maybe three things. They either give you the silent treatment and pretend you don't exist, which apparently maybe that's what they're doing to you.
Yeah, that's not very much fun either.
Yeah. Or they do what's called a soft kill. They make your life miserable. They dry out contacts. They do subtle threats and make your life completely hell on earth without actually killing you. The other thing is, actually killing a person. But the other thing, the question I actually had to come up with, and it's probably a dumb question that's been considered, but as far as contacting thousands and thousands of architectural firms across the country, I get bombarded with emails all the time, but can any of these can they just be in mass email, like trailers of the architects and engineers presentation and contact that made with many, many thousands of them? Is that ever done, or is it just personal appearances?
We've sent this 50-page booklet to 20,000 of them, and we'd like to send it to more if we get some money. But I didn't follow your question.
Yeah, I'm just talking about just like in email notification about or an email clip of the video or a link to your website.
Yes, we need to rely on you to do that because we can't spam 80,000 members of the American Institute of Architecture.
Okay, I can see I'm not real familiar with all that. I was just wondering how it might work. Okay.
Thank you. Everybody email the AV911truth.org link to every architect and engineer that you can find, and everybody else that you know. Yes.
Yeah, I bought a stack of those books. I've been giving them to people, and most of the people that I've given the books to, they go, "What's this?" I go, "Did you know about the third building?" They go, "A third building? I'm a first responder. I'm also an aircraft technician. I work for American Airlines, and I know the 757 and the 767 really, really well. And I know those airplanes I saw go in those buildings on TV. They were not our airplanes."
They went into the towers, and you're saying that's not the 767.
They weren't 767. They were military airplanes.
Did you write up something about that so that we can add to the research?
Yeah, and I know, the black boxes and all those, things. They're made to be indestructible.
And they say they didn't find any of the four.
Yeah,
but actually they found. There's evidence to suggest that
they
found all four.
Well, they should have made them out of passport material.
They should have made them out of passport material. That's true.
But that and along the technology to control remotely, fly airplanes. I believe it was in 1960s or maybe even earlier when they were doing the test of the 707. And they were landing it for 8 hours. They controlled an airplane, flying it, doing touch and goes for 8 hours before they crashed it into the ground. For research for the aircraft. There's a really good video out there. It was that one that was done in Canada. That big, where all the architects and engineers and investigators got on. If you do a search on 9/11 conference in Canada, Toronto, yes, is very, very good, very good. Also, I wanted to mention, there was, on 9/11, there was a box van filled with explosives going to the George Washington Bridge, so they were going to blow the bridge up also and blame it on these terrorists also. But they were caught and arrested. They were Israelis also. Also, there was a box van that had a mural of the 9/11 of the Twin Towers on it, with a picture of an airplane going into the side, exploding. It was a mural that was driven, and you can look all this stuff up, all this research of the police officers' conversations to dispatch. And they were looking for this, they saw this, and they were chasing it, but that box van was exploded. And again, you know, same deal, but...
Same deal meaning who was driving it?
Yeah, so Israelis. It's Officer DiCarlo. He's got basically a transcript, even he's done a video interview on there. There's a lot of information. When you start digging, it's you know, it's like opening a can of worms. You will find so much stuff.
Thank you. We got to go to the next gentleman.
And Larry Silverstein, he's got strong ties again with Israel. So, you know, it's...
Larry Silverstein is the owner of the World Trade Center complex. He secured the ownership of it in a 99-year lease just 6 weeks prior to 9/11. He had already owned Building 7, but the rest of it he owned with massive terrorist insurance. And here's 2 buildings that were requiring massive abatement of asbestos according to federal law that was required. So here he buys this whole complex knowing that he had to put billions to abate the asbestos, and they were half empty. He couldn't get people to lease these commercial spaces because they were so undesirable. Low ceilings, jail cell-like marching columns all around the perimeter, not these big open picturesque windows like other skyscrapers in the area. So, you know, weeks later he has his free asbestos abatement.
Yeah, and I'm just
it comes out with $5.68 billion
right. Yeah, that's
payout
big,
of terrorist insurance.
All of the money. But and the reason I'm passionate about it is the day it happened, I was at work working on aircraft wiring, and then I had a guy come up to me. He's like, "Hey Adam, come over. Look what your brothers did." That's what he told, and it just happened. You know, nobody knew who did it, and his brother works for the CIA.
Oh, he knew about it.
Yeah, and so that had me, and then once I found out, I didn't know. I believed the official story because I saw it on TV, and it wasn't until building.
Can you say that again? I believed the official story because I saw it on TV.
Exactly, and then when I saw building number 7, that's what started my whole.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the comments. Okay, he took most of your time, so you got 5 seconds.
I'm going to be quick. It's more of a comment than a question. I actually started investigating 9/11 back in about 2006. I used to watch a show called The Detonators on History Channel. And the one thing they always said was, you've got to put a lot more explosives around the cores because they don't want to come down. And that's kind of what ticked in my head. And as I started researching and looking on YouTube and the different groups around, the only groups that were out there were the way out there, the government behind it, and I've always formed my opinions based on what I can prove. And I've always said, I don't know what happened, but I know what didn't happen. And eventually, through my research, I found your Building 7 video out there, and became acquainted with your organization, joined as the non-member or non-architect member. And I just want to thank you for forming this group, putting some integrity behind those of us that are seeking the truth, and doing everything you do. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that so much. Sorry to limit your time.
I'd have you go on and on and on. And we have one final question and some plug for some stuff. Yes, 50-page booklet. How many of these do we have? A dozen? 2 dozen? 40? Oh my God, there's lots of these books left, guys. Excellent to give away to people. And then tonight's movie, $20. That supports AB 9/11 Truth, by the way. And Stu is for sale too, if you like him. Thank you. All back here. Don't go home without the materials you need to convince others. Final question of the night.
Just in closing, first I'd like to just honor to have you out here, and you're setting a great example of how to be actively involved in making a change in our society for the better. And this is both for you and Jim as well. Just a quick rundown, your main reasons, after all that we've seen with what's gone on, why is this happening? Why do you find that this event took place? I'll leave it at that.
Well, for my money, this is similar to the Kennedy assassination in that it wasn't just one purpose, okay? This was a confluence of agendas. You can go all the way back to Dick Cheney as Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford, and Rumsfeld, okay, who was Chief of Staff in the White House at that time. And they came up with a plan for the Middle East, which was involved increased military presence in the Middle East to gain control over the oil supplies, regime change in Iraq, and also regime change in Afghanistan. But at that time, everybody said, what are you talking about? That's just making war. You're crazy. And so that got put on the back burner until 2000. And in 2000 now, Bush got selected, and they were in power. And in September of 2000, they were part of that neocon think tank, the Project for a New American Century. And they wrote a big paper and said, we need to have more military presence in the Middle East, gain control of the oil supplies, regime change in Afghanistan, Iraq. And then whoever wrote that, though, was pretty appreciative. They said, but you know, this will be a hard sell to the American public unless there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Well, a year later, they got it. Okay, and then we followed the same course as Nazi Germany, which in the early 1933 was a democratic republic, the Weimar Republic. Hitler was chancellor, kind of like vice president, and then the Reichstag, the parliament burned, was gutted, and in those kinder, gentler times, that was such a shock to the Germans as 9/11 was to us, and Hitler says, well, give me the power and I'll stop these terrorists. So they ran through the Enabling Act, which created the Gestapo, the concentration camps, consolidated all the police agencies, and does that sound familiar? We got 9/11, and then the Patriot Act, which kind of like Obamacare, they said we have to pass that so we can find out what's in it. And I don't know about you guys, but any one of my elected representatives that would pass a law or a piece of legislation that they didn't even read, didn't know what was in it, I think they are treasonous and they should be thrown out of office. But anyway, so as you can see, you've got all that, and then without going into the long spiel, I can explain it all to you. But at the heart of it, we've got an insurance scam. The World Trade Center towers, which were built on Rockefeller land and commonly known as the David and the Nelson, were universally disliked in New York because they thought they broke up their beautiful skyline, and they were 30 years old, and they had even talked about tearing them down. But they couldn't do it because the city determined that they were half filled with asbestos. And they said, we're not going to allow asbestos to fly all over Manhattan. So they couldn't tear them down. There was also very quietly and almost secretly a study done to see if they couldn't renovate these towers because after 30 years they were deteriorating. Well, you can imagine what it would cost to put up scaffolding off 110-story buildings, stories of 2 buildings. So it just was not feasible. So I asked you, what does the mafia do if they got a building and they can't rent it, they can't sell it, they can't renovate it? They torch it for the insurance. 2 months before 9/11, the Port Authority leased a 99-year lease to Larry Silverstein and Properties. And the first thing he did was get Securicom. which was on the board of directors, Marvin Bush, and was headed, the CEO was Wirt Walker III, as in George Herbert Walker Bush. So Bush got control over the World Trade Center towers. Next thing he did was go and get insurance with double indemnity for terrorist attack. I defy any of you to go see if you can get your home, insured against terrorist attack. And by the way, he didn't get this with State Farm or some little insurance company. This was Swiss Re, the giant German insurance company, Alliance, which had indemnified the Nazi concentration camps against damage by their inmates. Okay, and then boom, of course, the planes hit the towers, and we've got this settlement.
But Jim, isn't Swiss Re one of the implicated firms in the put options?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So after wrangling in court, Silverstein argued that there were 2 planes, 2 buildings, and therefore he wanted double indemnity. But after wrangling around for about a year, he ended up getting $4.6 billion, $25 million investment. Not bad. Now, but he didn't get to keep all that money. He had to share it with the mortgage holder, which happened to be Blackstone Group, which was headed, I'm sure by some sheer coincidence, by Peter G. Peterson, chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, the secret society that's been running our foreign policy since World War I. It takes a lot of background, and you have to learn a lot of things before you can figure it out. So anyway, you can see that the destruction of the World Trade Center not only took care of the insurance problem, the money problem, and the money simply shifted into pockets, went from Peter to Paul, and it also gave us the impetus to go into the Middle East, started 2, 3 wars, if you want to count Syria, and scrapped our liberties and created our now existing police state.
Mr. Jim Marrs, right there in a nutshell. He can say the things that we don't. Thanks, everybody.